Good afternoon from a very warm Johannesburg this afternoon. And welcome from the ACSR office. We are just so delighted to have you all with us again this afternoon. As we've come to really enjoy our weekly webinars with you, as an office, we are learning so much. So we just pray and hope that as attendees, you're also learning a lot. So welcome to especially the ECD teachers and any other teacher that is with us this afternoon. A special welcome to our ACSR schools, but that does not exclude other schools that have joined us, with Christian teachers that are scattered in all our schools and are making a huge difference across Southern Africa. We'd particularly like to also welcome our teachers from Zimbabwe this afternoon and Eswatini. And we pray and hope that our attendees from India and America are with us again today. It's just such an amazing platform that we can share knowledge and expertise from. And that's one thing that the coronavirus has opened to us. Please also note that this is being recorded on Facebook Live. So if you would like to go back and watch it on Facebook Live at a later stage, you are more than welcome to. And also know that South African teachers that are registered with SACE will be issued with a certificate and points at the end of this presentation. But today I'm especially excited to introduce Bianca to you. And what got me thinking and also got me to invite Bianca today was I watched a presentation by a teacher the other day who was presenting a phonics lesson. However, she had a mask on, and as she was presenting her lesson, nobody could actually hear what she was trying to say. And I'm sure you understand what I'm trying to portray there. Masks seem to have influenced our way of teaching, whether in the classroom or on live streaming online. So Bianca is going to share a whole lot of expertise with us today on how to cope with the masks and the screens that we as teachers have to use in the classrooms. But Bianca, I had the honor of meeting Bianca about 2 years ago. She was a speech therapist at the school where I was teaching. And what a gentle, gentle soul. The children absolutely loved going to her. And I had a little boy in my class who said to me that he thought he'd prefer going to teacher Bianca on a daily basis than coming to my class. She just has such an amazing way with children. But Bianca qualified with honors as a speech and hearing therapist at WITS in 2008. After completing her community service, she began working within a school-based private practice in 2010. She then started a pediatric-based private practice in 2012 in Johannesburg. Bianca is passionate about working with children and developing each child's speech and language, auditory processing, and spelling ability to allow them to reach their full potential and excel at school. Bianca is also the mother of 2 beautiful children. Bianca, I'm really excited to hear what you have to share with us this afternoon and help us navigate the world of masks that we are living in at the moment. So welcome. Also, the attendees are more than welcome to type in questions. And in the last 15 minutes of this session, we will attempt to answer some of the questions that might be raised during this time. But welcome, Bianca. Looking forward to what you have to share with us this afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good
Can
afternoon.
everyone hear me?
Yes,
okay, I would just like to say it's a privilege and it's an honor to be here and imparting my expertise with you guys. And I hope that you enjoy it. First of all, I want to start off in saying that communication is the essence of human life. Communication is the exchange of information between one or more conversational partners, and communication is what makes us uniquely human. Communication involves both verbal and non-verbal aspects of communication. Communication development starts as early as infancy. Non-verbal aspects of communication form the basis of attachment in infants. The attachment process is an interactive and dynamic process where the caregiver and the baby participate in an exchange of non-verbal emotional cues that make the baby feel understood and feel safe. A secure attachment will then grow out of the success of this non-verbal communication process between the caregiver and baby. The secure attachment will then contribute to the development of parts of the baby's brain that are responsible for social, emotional, and communication development. As infants, they will engage in a range of signaling behaviors in order to seek and maintain social contact with their caregivers. This may include eye contact, mimicking facial expressions, as well as crying. These signaling behaviors serve to elicit responses from the caregiver. Even as young infants, we are innately wired as humans to communicate socially and to engage with others. If you think of COVID-19, the first things that might come to your mind might be social distancing and the mandatory use of masks. Due to COVID-19, these babies will be exposed to less opportunities to observe facial expressions. In order to mimic facial expressions, a baby would need to be able to see the caregiver's facial expressions. And the use of masks and shields will definitely have an impact on this ability, particularly in the instance where the parents have to go back to work and the child will be cared for by a nanny or a caregiver, or if the child is attending a daycare, all the staff members would have to wear masks, and therefore the children would not be able to see their caregivers' faces. So what do we need in order to communicate? We first of all need a means to communicate. As humans, we use speech to communicate, which is the pronunciation and articulation of sounds. There are also other ways that we can communicate using sign language and other assistive technologies. Language is what we use to effectively communicate. We need to be able to understand what's being said, as well as respond appropriately using our own language to convey our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and ideas. I just wanted to share with you on my slide. Let me just quickly find it. Okay. All right. So when we look at language, language has got three main components. The form of language, which is the morphology. So that's the structure of language. So how we say something would be the phonetic ability, the phonology of language. But the morphology is the sentence structure, the grammar, and the use of word endings. The use of language would be your pragmatic ability. Why we say something could be engaging in conversation, the social rules that govern how we are able to communicate with others, as well as matching our language to that social situation. The content of language is the meaning, what is behind what you are saying. Okay, so it's the semantic ability of the language, and it includes your own vocabulary, what we say. All right. Working as a speech therapist, we see children that are developing within one or more of these language developmental areas. Language is obviously pertinent aspect in terms of a child's development because it is the vehicle that we use to form relationships with others. And as mentioned previously, we are innately wired to communicate as human beings. In the academic environment, it's also the medium that we use for learning. Since the inception of COVID-19, it's obviously posed many additional challenges within the lives of children that struggle with any language difficulties. As we know, the use of masks has become a mandatory requirement since the 1st of May 2020 in South Africa. So I do believe that all children that are currently in our school system are being impacted by the use of masks, but there are children that are even more at risk of having difficulty because they already have a disadvantage in terms of their developmental delays. The children that I wanted to mention that are struggling at the moment, or possibly struggling even more, are your children with autism. Because children with autism struggle with understanding and picking up facial cues and facial expressions, even when a face is visible, it would be made that much harder if half the face was covered. That child would not be able to interpret any body language, any facial expressions. Children with autism also struggle to make eye contact with their conversational partners, and therefore it will be even more difficult if a person is wearing a mask, because now they have got no way of knowing what their conversational partner is thinking or feeling. Children with ADHD are also obviously at risk. They typically have difficulty paying attention to small details, and this would also be affected if the speaker's face is covered by a mask. The other populations that are affected would be children with speech difficulties, those with language delays, and children with auditory processing difficulties. Hearing impaired population is also a population that is hugely at risk, because one of the factors that we use in terms of assisting a child would be to use visual cues to compensate for that lack of hearing. And with a facial mask, the visual cues are not there. So there has been some research into using different types of masks to assist with the visual aspects in communication, which allows the mouth to be visible. So these masks are called social masks, and they allow the face to be more visible. All right. But what about the children with hearing difficulties? So just to give you a brief overview of the auditory system, sound is received via the outer ear, and it causes the eardrum to then vibrate in a certain way. Then there are tiny bones within the middle ear that then will move a certain way according to the way that the eardrum had vibrated. And then those little bones called the ossicles are connected to the inner ear, which is that snail-shaped picture over there. And the way in which the bones now move affects the liquid that is within the cochlea. And there's tiny receptor hair cells that are then activated by this displacement of the liquid. And then that information is then sent via the auditory nerve to the brain stem and to the auditory cortex, where the information is then interpreted. All right. What is auditory processing? So we have an idea of what happens with the auditory system, but now what happens with that processing of information? Simply stated, auditory processing is what you do with what you hear. It's the way in which auditory information is interpreted and can be influenced by a number of different factors. Auditory processing is not a singular skill, but rather a hierarchy of skills that are basic to listening and the communication process. It's very important to note, although there is a hierarchy, each level is not clearly defined, and they often fall within each other and are basically inseparable and overlap. So it's not one individual skill, but they basically will have a ripple effect on each other. I just wanted to share with you the slide that basically can indicate how many areas or how many different disorders are affected by auditory processing. So you can see that a child with ADHD would have some sort of auditory processing difficulties. A child that's suffering with depression may have some auditory processing difficulties. Those on the autistic spectrum, those suffering from anxiety. All of these children will have some difficulty processing auditory information. Sorry, I also wanted to just give you a brief overview of the auditory system. So once the information goes up the auditory, sorry, it doesn't want, oh, there we go, up the auditory nerve, you can see that the information has now left those snail-shaped areas in the inner ear and now the information is now traveling up the brainstem. At this stage, there's a lot of crossing over of information and a lot of integration of the information. And then the information is then interpreted in the auditory cortex in the brain. Okay. So now we're going to have a look at the hierarchy of auditory processing, all the abilities that need to be in place in order to perceive and interpret auditory information effectively. If you look at the base of the pyramid, would be sensation, which is the ability to perceive the presence of sound. The next level that we look at is perception and discrimination, which is the ability to perceive differences between sounds of different frequency, duration, and intensity. So a sound with a different frequency, a low frequency sound would be like a drum sound, and a high frequency sound would be like a high pitched sound. The duration of the sound, how long the sound is present for, and the intensity is how loud it is. The next level up from that one is localization, which is the ability to locate the acoustic signal or the sound source. So can someone identify if a sound is coming from the right-hand side or the left-hand side? Then we move up to auditory attention, which is the ability to direct, maintain, and sustain attention to an auditory stimulus. So this would be, are you able to pay attention and sustain attention when someone is talking? Are you able to listen to their speech? Auditory figure ground is the ability to identify a primary sound source in the presence of background noise. So in the classroom, the teacher would be the primary sound source. She would be giving the instruction, and the competing noise in the classroom may be the chit-chattering of learners in the class, or the shuffling of papers, the moving of chairs. It could be the ambient noise from the electricity or the air conditioner. Auditory discrimination is the ability to discriminate among words and sounds that are acoustically similar. When background noise is present, it's much more difficult to discriminate between acoustically similar sounds. So for example, fun or sun, thin or fin. Auditory closure is the ability to understand the whole word or message when parts of the message are missing. In noisy environments, this skill is used to comprehend and understand messages. The stronger the language base is, the easier the skill would be. And I always tell parents when I'm having feedback meetings with them that auditory processing is it's a secondary to your language development. Your language needs to be developed and strong enough in order to be able to process information effectively. We then go on to auditory synthesis, which is the ability to blend or merge isolated sounds or phonemes. A phoneme is basically just a sound. That's what it means. So that would be if I say cat. What does that make? It makes cat, as opposed to which makes can. The auditory analysis is the opposite of synthesis, and that's the ability to divide words into syllables and sounds. So dividing a word into syllables, so cowboy, cowboy has got two parts, two syllables. If I take away cow from cowboy, what's left? Boy. And then one step further from that would be, can the child identify the sounds in the word? So if I say, what sounds do you hear in dog? D, o, g. Okay. Auditory association is the ability to interpret and to understand that auditory information. In order to remember and recall the information, we have to have some sort of memory. So the auditory memory aspect would be, can they recall the information that was heard? Can they recall the instruction? And the top of the pyramid is then your higher language listening skills, which are the ability to make inferences, understand riddles, and understand verbal math problems. So they kind of all go together in order to process information effectively. Right, so what is an auditory processing disorder? Children with auditory processing difficulties can be affected in a number of different ways. As we saw in the pyramid, there are a huge amount of areas that can be affected, and it could be affecting one or two areas or all those areas. It's not just a specific thing. A child with auditory processing problems may appear to have a hearing difficulty, so that means that the sound is not getting to the brain correctly. but once they are tested, we find that they actually have normal hearing. So what actually happens when the information goes up to the auditory pathway? What is actually happening in a child with these difficulties? Well, one of three things can happen. Information can go up in one ear and out the other, literally. Information may get lost as it travels up the pathways, and the crossing over of information is not happening, or the information can get to the brain and the auditory cortex, but the brain is not interpreting that auditory information effectively. So what difficulties do they have? They have difficulties distinguishing between similar sounds or words from one another. A child with an auditory processing difficulty might hear the phrase, "Tell me how a couch and a chair are alike." They might hear that as, "Tell me how a cow and a hare are alike." They have difficulty hearing subtle differences between words, shoulder and soldier. They might have difficulties with cold and called. So those minuscule differences in the sound of words, they often have difficulty identifying those. They have difficulty concentrating when there's background noise, and this can lead to difficulty with understanding and recalling instructions. And later on may have difficulties with spelling and reading because of this. They also have difficulties understanding speech, particularly in the presence of background noise, or when there's more than one speaker, or when the speaker is talking too quickly, or the sound quality is quite poor. And that just makes me think of the new normal that we're in. Online classrooms are the new norm. And I know that a lot of the time the sound quality is not great. And I think that these children are really struggling to participate and to understand what is happening. So that's just something to keep in mind. Children with auditory processing difficulties also have an aversion to music at times. They are the children that go to music class with their hands over their ears and often do not enjoy music. They may also be auditory defensive and feel that it's too loud when it actually isn't. Okay. So how do these children present in our classrooms? They typically ask for repetition frequently. They give inconsistent responses to what they hear. They often misread and misunderstand what's being said. They are easily distracted and have difficulty sustaining their auditory attention. They struggle to follow directions appropriately and struggle to discriminate between sounds. These difficulties that children with auditory processing difficulties, these difficulties that they face are more prominent in an environment that is noisy or when they are listening to more complex information. So although the use of face shields and masks is of the utmost importance in stopping the spread of this virus, it has had huge ramifications for this population of children, as the use of face masks muffles the sound that is heard. It also affects attenuation, and obviously, as we've discussed, the mouth is not visible. It also removes from the visual aspect of communication for this population. In fact, one of the compensatory strategies that we use for children with auditory processing difficulties in the classroom is to use a look and listen approach. And this is not possible if the educator is using a mask or a shield. The use of shields is often better visually, and at least the mouth is visible, but there's still the presence of glare, and audibility is still not clear, as the shield also affects the transmission of sound. I know in my therapy room, I can't use a mask because the children need to see my face visually. And it can be quite distracting for them to have someone with a shield on. I've been asked, am I a fireman? Why am I wearing that funny hat? Can I please take off the funny hat? So it is quite distracting for the younger little kiddies. Studies have also shown that medical masks provide a low pass filter, meaning that the low frequencies, I'm just going to share with you a picture of the different frequencies quickly. Okay. All right, so if you have a look there on the picture, on the left-hand side is the loudness, and on the top, you can see all the different frequencies. So on the far left is the low frequency sounds, and on the right-hand side, is the high frequency sounds. So the study indicated that the low frequency sounds pass through the filter of the mask, but the higher frequency sounds are lost. Okay, and those are the sounds that we use to distinguish between different words usually. Basically, you can see that almost a third of the speech sounds will not be heard clearly if you speak through a mask. The study also looked at the use of different types of masks and found that cloth masks appear to be better if they have a loosely woven fabric as opposed to a more tightly woven fabric, but the thickness and the number of layers was not something that impacted the transmission of sound. There was another study that was done in Israel in April 2020 on the effects of wearing masks on patients that had acquired COVID-19, obviously older patients that had been hospitalized, and they found that speech quality degradation in combination with the background noise, with the absence of visual cues, has rendered speech almost unintelligible for many of the participants. So obviously the older population are at risk for having a hearing loss as well, but it just shows how much of the speech is actually lost because of the mask, because of the presence of background noise. It's rather concerning. And obviously we can't see the face, so we can't get any additional visual cues from that. So masks potentially sorry, I've lost my place. So the use of masks could potentially affect all areas of language development. It could affect the child's phonology, where the child is developing the sound system in a language, as they cannot hear or visualize the differences between sounds. So if I say n or you won't be able to tell the difference if I'm wearing a mask. It's very difficult. So if I'm saying meat or meat, a child wouldn't be able to distinguish the difference. They also have difficulties possibly in the area of grammatical development, where if I say a boy jumped over the fence, the morphological marker ED is showing it's a past tense sentence. Whereas if I say the boy jumps over the fence, that's obviously present tense. So the presence of a mask may actually affect that ability to understand the differences and the use of morphological markers. And pragmatically, the use of masks is also affecting our communication, because it's not our normal to speak through masks. We can't see each other's facial expressions. We can't see a smile. We can't pick up any emotional cues or sarcasm without our face being visible. So research has also suggested that there's a strong correlation between your phonological awareness, which is a component of your auditory processing, and your reading and writing success. Phonological awareness is a higher language skill that involves the knowledge of sounds and words, and it includes rhyming, decoding and encoding words, and phoneme or sound manipulation. I wanted to also share with you the diagram of the reading pyramid. Doesn't seem to be wanting to do it. Oh, there we go. So if you have a look at the pyramid, you can see at the base of the pyramid, we have phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, and in the middle is phonics. So you can see primarily those skills are auditory-based skills. Phonological awareness is hearing individual words, hearing if words rhyme or not, hearing individual syllables in words. Phonemic awareness is hearing and manipulating beginning and ending sounds in words, hearing and manipulating middle sounds in words, and hearing how many sounds are in a word and if the sound is the same or different. And then phonics would obviously be when the child is able to associate the grapheme and the morpheme. Sorry, not the morpheme, the phoneme. So that would be the letter and the sound correlation. And then we obviously move up to reading fluency, and then your ability to understand what you are reading. So there are two elements to this in our new classrooms. If we look at the protocols that need to be followed in order to be COVID compliant, all the surface areas, the pictures need to be removed, carpets, and these are often what we use in a class or in a big space to reduce the reverberation of the sound in that room. So the sound quality in our classrooms is also changing, just for the children that are coming to our one-on-one lessons. In terms of online teaching, it has been monumental in providing a means for us to reach and educate our children, as it has also had its disadvantages. As mentioned, the online audibility is not always clear, and at times it can be delayed, which poses further problems in terms of understanding. I know a lot of the schools have basically taken on a hybrid teaching model where they are using online teaching as well as teaching within the classroom. So they will teach the children online and they'll have the children in the classroom. So the difficulty that comes into play with that is that the children online are hearing all the background noise that could be very distracting for them. So if there's shuffling of papers, moving of chairs, that child that is online can hear all those things, and it obviously is affecting the way that they are able to hear the instructions in the classroom. Studies have also shown, as we know, that children learn using their senses. So if we are just going to be using online teaching, we need to engage in a multimodality approach. So we need to get them to use all their different senses, because those senses are kind of not going to be exercised and going to be left behind at some stage. As a speech therapist, I do also believe that we live in such a visual world where children are captivated by 3D TVs, a wide range of visually engaging games and apps. And this is concerning because many children are not activating the auditory modality for learning. And as we know, reading is primarily an auditory skill. Although it definitely has had its place, it has been an advantage to have remote learning, it has also maintained a very isolated model of interaction with the world. And this could potentially change the world as we know it. So what strategies can we use in our new classrooms? What we can do is gain attention before giving an instruction. We can check comprehension, ask questions relating to the subject to ensure that all are understanding and following the discussion. We can rephrase and reinstate, which will encourage the child to indicate if they do not understand. Sorry. We can also simplify our grammar and substitute words to facilitate understanding. We can also use brief instructions. We can also pre-tutor our children, especially those children that are online. We could possibly send a concept or a lesson plan home before the lesson in order for the child to familiarize themselves with the concept. The alternative is that we could then send the online lesson home as well afterwards so that the concept can be reiterated. We could introduce key vocabulary before discussing a new concept. We could use written as well as verbal instructions. Use visual cues where possible to facilitate understanding. And within the classroom, we still need to think of preferential seating. Although social distancing has to still occur, we need to think of, is that child positioned in an adequate spot in order to see the teacher clearly and to hear what is actually happening in the classroom. So there's other activities that we can also use to activate our auditory processing abilities, and I'm just going to chat about those very briefly. So for auditory spatial awareness, so that is the awareness of sound, so that's your sound localization. We can blindfold the child and have them sit in the middle of the room, and then we could walk around the room calling out to the child or shaking a bell or a rattle, and then the child would have to localize and find the sound source. This is a game that could also be used in the classroom because we could possibly still use social distancing. The other one that we could play is Marco Polo, which is also quite nice because we could probably still use the social distancing. So one child will obviously have to call out Marco, and then the others would say Polo, and then the child has to try and locate one of those children. So it's just important, obviously, to remove any furniture because the child obviously doesn't want to be injured whilst doing these things. The other one is auditory discrimination, where we could take 4 or 5 different size tins and we could put different beans into them. So we could either fill 2 tins with the same beans, and then we could shake them, and the child would have to identify if those are the same substances inside those tins. Or you could also use a variety of different tins and the child has to guess which substance is in which tin. You could also take 5 glasses and fill them up with different heights of water and let the child use a spoon and just to tap lightly against each side to listen to the different sounds that it can make. We can play around with rhyming words like the fat cat sat on the mat, patting the rat with the hat. also use popular nursery rhymes, and we could change the words accordingly. We could play games like Wolfie Wolfie, where the children are in one line, and then we could still use our social distancing. And then the children say, Wolfie Wolfie, what's the time? And the child that's in the front would obviously have to give the time and say it's lunch. Right, for auditory figure ground, what could we do to develop this skill? We could play music within the classroom, obviously quite soft initially, and give instructions and see if the child is able to hear them. And we could also use a softer tone of voice to make it more difficult. Also whisper the instructions and see if the child can manage to execute the instruction correctly. We could also record different environmental noises and play these noises and ask the child to identify them. You could also play music at the same time to make it slightly more challenging. You could also ask the child to identify how far the sound source is, if it was a close or far away sound. With auditory closure, we could, auditory closure, once again, is the child able to fill in the gaps of a message? So an example would be, go and fetch your book, would be, go and fetch your book. So a child that's got auditory processing difficulties would struggle to identify and complete that message. So what we could do to develop this skill is obviously work on the child's ability to identify syllables in words. So we could start by saying, okay, tell me what word I'm trying to say. Error, and then the child would have to say plane. Hippopotamus. Rhinoceros. Dinosaur. Okay. So closely linked, as mentioned, with auditory closure is your ability to syllabify words. So, for example, dinosaur has got 3 syllables. Rat has got 1 syllable. So you'd start at the lowest level where there's 1 syllable and then move your way up. Okay. Like with your auditory analysis and auditory synthesis, the analysis is obviously how they're breaking up words into their sounds, and are they able to identify words in a sentence? So if I say, I have a black car, there's 5 words in that sentence. And again, working on syllables, Spider-Man. We can also play I spy. So you could say, I spy with my little eye, something starting with a P. It's obviously important to use the sound. You could also make it more challenging and say, I spy with my little eye, something that ends with oat. And they could find a goat or a boat or a coat, for example. You could also say different sounds with short words and ask them to join the sounds together. So if I say, okay, what word am I trying to say? And then they'll have to join them together to say cat. Obviously, we would be working on the sounds and not the alphabetic letter names. With auditory memory, we could get them to memorize and clap a sequence. And then the child would have to mimic that sequence. We could also play games like, Mommy went to the shop and I bought cheese. And then another child would add, Mommy went to the shop and bought cheese and spaghetti. And then you go around until the information is forgotten. You can also change it and say, I went to the zoo and I saw this animal, or I went to the circus and I saw that. We could also then develop their vocabulary. We could also ask children to recall their home numbers, their house numbers, their mom's phone numbers, and help them by remembering shopping lists, for example. I just want to end off in saying, just find my quotes. It's a bit delayed. We'll get there. Here we go. One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world. I think it's a lot about going back to basics to empower our children to listen and to learn in our new normal. Thank you so much.
Okay. Sure, Bianca, you just,
sorry,
once again, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. It just made me realize once again that teachers are actually conductors of orchestras, because we're sitting with so many different children in our classes with so many different learning styles. And I can only imagine that both our visual learners and our auditory learners are being impacted during this COVID time because of the use of masks. I think I'm a visual learner, and I definitely need facial expression and to read lips to be able to get full understanding of what people are saying. Just to the people that are with us today, please don't forget that you can type in questions and answers at the bottom of your screen. But we did have one question, which I will be reading to you. It says, how do you deal with children who already struggle because English is not their first language, especially with online classes?
Yes, you know, in South Africa, we have 13 official languages. So that's almost every second child that has a difficulty. You know, it's very challenging, and it also will be affected by how much input the child is having in terms of English at home. So if a child is just bilingual, obviously they will develop English at a later stage. But if a child has got a language difficulty, the likelihood of that child developing, can you hear me?
Yes.
Is it fine? Oh, okay, sorry, I was just checking. The likelihood of that child developing English as well as their home language is highly unlikely. So obviously I always tell parents and I tell teachers, the earlier the intervention starts, the better. So what information do you need to get from the parents? You need to ask the parents, are they proficient in their language at home, or are they also struggling with that language? It is challenging, and parents also need to understand that you can't speak one language for 3 years and then go and educate your child in English and expect them to just cope fine. Because as I've mentioned, language is the vehicle for learning. So what language are they using for learning? So inevitably it does put them a little bit at risk. So I think with a child that has got any language difficulties is to start with building the vocabulary. Their language base has to be strong enough in order to process that information. So if you can start with building the vocabulary, that's going to be the best way. Just also to mention, if they are bilingual, they need to also select a parent that will be speaking a specific language. So if, for example, they've got English and Afrikaans at home, then English will be, if the mom speaks English, then she must speak English to the child, and if the dad speaks Afrikaans, she must only speak Afrikaans to the child. I hope that answered your question.
It does, thank you. Bianca, there's been a lot of talk around school readiness for, especially for our grade R's going into grade 1 for next year, and how they'll be impacted in their learning development. What do you think teachers could focus on during this time to make sure that the children are ready for grade 1 for next year when the more formal learning situation happens?
Well, that's a tough one, and I do think that whoever is being taught in 2020 is going to have gaps inevitably in wherever they are. What I think the teachers need to focus on from a speech therapy point of view is to focus on those listening skills. Those listening skills are the basis for their reading and the basis for their writing development. So if you can strengthen those listening skills, that will assist the child in progressing forward in grade 1. Definitely.
Absolutely. And then I have a question here that says, I have a child in my class who has a problem forming words. He fully understands and has a good vocab, but not able to utter his words correctly. How can I help him?
How old is the child? Do you know? Not.
I could imagine probably grade R, grade 1.
Okay, so we need to identify what the problem is. Does the child have a stutter? Or is the child having difficulty with muscle tone? Is it a planning difficulty? So it's quite difficult, but what you could start with is like oral motor exercises. So like blowing little cotton wool balls through straws, that would just help. If it is a muscle difficulty, that would definitely help. And then just forming different oral motor movements like ooh, ee, and seeing if that actually, helps the child progress in terms of their speech. If it's a stuttering difficulty, that obviously would be a little bit different, but definitely oral motor exercises will not harm any child, so it will only benefit them. So if that obviously does help them, then it's probably a muscle tone and a planning difficulty. And then you can, after you've done the oral motor exercises, start to do sounds and then see how they're able to progress with that.
Okay, that teacher got back to me. She said the child was 3.5.
3.5. Okay.
And
So,
I also, yes, carry on.
No, you can tell me. No, you can
No,
tell me.
no, please carry on.
Okay. Okay, 3.5. Is it a language difficulty? Is it a speech difficulty? Is it a fluency, the stuttering? There's a whole lot of factors that come into play there. So it's difficult to decipher what the actual difficulty is, but it could be one of those issues. If it's a language issue, again, start building that vocabulary and see if the child is wanting to obviously engage. And also ask the parents if the child is talking at home. But at 3 years old, if the child is not talking, we need to intervene at some stage, because it's quite late and we're going to cause a delay in their learning, because once again, language is the vehicle for learning. So it just causes a lag each time. So the sooner you can help them, the better, really.
Absolutely. And then I've got a comment here from somebody that says, very interesting, thank you. I'm working well with autistic and SPD children. I agree it's difficult to hear the child. How can I help?
So it's difficult to hear the child, as in are they wearing a mask, or are you not too sure? Look, that is a challenge. Obviously, like I said, the shield is often better. I know with some children that are autistic, they won't even wear a mask at all because they're tactile defensive. So that causes additional issues. I don't know if the school that you work in maybe has augmentative alternative communication. So maybe use pictures to try and facilitate understanding and communication between you and the child. That would definitely help them if they're nonverbal. Absolutely. I hope that's...
Thank you. Interesting question here. How will you assess a child who is nonverbal in grade R, age 5, and how do you help this child?
Okay, so when we assess a child, we look at the receptive language, which is the understanding, and the expressive language. So the nonverbal aspect is the expressive language. But does the child have understanding? We want to know how much does that child have in terms of understanding, and we need to basically identify the level that that child is functioning at. Usually if a child is nonverbal, I mean, children start talking with their first word at 1. So if he's now 5, that's like a 4-year delay in terms of his language development. So we need to identify where he is in terms of his development, and we basically start at that level and try and engage and get him to start communicating. Usually, if a child is not talking and non-verbal, they may not have the precursors for language development, like joint attention, object permanence. So we need to identify if those are present or missing. And if they are missing, then we start at that level and trying to get the child to engage in those activities. If they are present, then we'll then move on to more complex things like trying to identify pictures, all of that. I hope that answers the question. It's quite a challenging question.
Yes, and I just remember when I was in the classroom, Bianca, the children become like your own children, especially with those non-verbal children, and you start picking up on their physical clues and their facial expressions, and you begin to have a non-verbal communication pattern with them. Yes, absolutely. And we just need to, I think as teachers, need to be aware of that, so absolutely, that we don't allow that to become a pattern, and also to make parents aware of that problem as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And do you think we should up our use of visual aids?
Definitely, in the classroom, visual aids will only assist. If you use a multi-modality approach, that's going to be the most effective, because as you've mentioned, there's visual learners, there's auditory learners, there's, tactile learners. So we need to kind of, create a classroom that's going to be beneficial for everyone. So the more modalities that you're using, the more children you're going to reach, and the more the children are going to learn. So I definitely think at this stage, because the auditory is unfortunately not what it should be, that I think visual should be included more in the classroom. Yeah, definitely.
And just on a lighter note, I've got a friend who's a teacher in a grade R class, and she said the first week when the children came back and they all had their masks on, she said she's never had such a silent class in her life. She said it sorted out all her discipline issues. It was almost like mask was like a piece of sellotape that had been stuck over her lips.
Yeah, that is true. But you know, in as much as that's humorous, it's sad because we are communication beings. We want to communicate. We're social, and the children are not having that social interaction anymore, and that's that's concerning and it's sad. And I'm sure there's going to be huge ramifications for all of these difficulties. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I've also got friends that are teaching in schools where it's compulsory for the staff members to be wearing a mask at all times.
Yes.
And that's the video clip that I heard of a teacher trying to do a phonics lesson. And I honestly couldn't hear. But I don't know, this is just me, feel that if you put enough physical distance between yourself and the children, that it might be safe to actually try to communicate without your mask. How would you feel about that? Obviously, you've got children that come into your practice,
Yes.
and you might have to do that.
Yes, it is definitely challenging. In my practice, because I'm a speech therapist, I need to be able to see the child's face. So some parents are like, please, can you keep the mask on? Or not the mask, but the shield. Obviously, I can't do anything with the mask. But I do tell them I can't do anything with the shield. They're going to have to take it off. So in my therapy room, obviously, it's a one-on-one interaction. I still keep my shield on and the child removes their shield and their mask. Then I do have like a sneeze screen, which works quite well. So that's also something that we could maybe think of in the classroom where the teacher is kind of confined with her sneeze screen, but then she's completely visible. But then again, there's the glare aspect again that comes into play. So it's just a challenging time, really. But I do feel that the risk of infection is obviously less the further you are away from the child. So I don't think it would be, you know, as detrimental. But then again, the distance obviously creates the difficulty with the visual not being there, and then the auditory they're not hearing, which is quite far away. So that's another element to think about. And again, the classrooms are empty, they echo. All the classrooms are echoing now because we can't have posters and carpets and all these fun things anymore because, you know, they're just not viable for the COVID life. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Who would have thought we would have been sitting in this position at the beginning of this year? And as sad as it might be, maybe teaching is more effective online, where you can present without that mask on, where children can see your facial expression and do lip reading. But that to me is second best.
Yes.
No,
you know, those masks that have got the opening or the open area, they also fog up. So that's again something else that causes another like issue within an issue. So it's kind of like
there's so many issues.
Yeah, you reach like dead ends everywhere you go. Like you just don't know where to turn anymore.
Absolutely.
It is challenging teaching in these conditions. And I mean, for me on a one-on-one, it's challenging. I have to disinfect everything after each child. We have to allow 15 minutes between each child to allow the air to like vent out or whatever it's supposed to be. But a teacher is even in more of a dilemma than me because they have got more than one child in their class and they have to make sure that that child sits in one spot and doesn't move around, doesn't touch things. And that's just not always possible, especially with the younger kiddies and those kiddies that do have issues. They're going to touch everything. I know I work with populations that they can't sit still. So like I have to pack everything away or spray and disinfect everything after each child because it's just like havoc.
I'm sure. But hats off to you and the work you're doing and continue to do, even if it's online. And Bianca, I could continue chatting to you for hours and hours because there's just so much that we could be chatting about. But we've nearly come to the end of our time. So I'd really, really just like to thank you so much for your time, offering up your time and expertise this afternoon. I know that I've learned a lot. And I hope our teachers are feeling more empowered and can help our children and parents navigate this whole disaster that we're facing. So thank you. And I hope that we can continue our working relationship and friendship. So really, I'm very, very grateful to you today. But before everybody goes, I would just like to announce that we have decided to continue with our ECD conference in September this year. I don't know if any of you attended our conference in Johannesburg last year. It was a 2-day conference, and we had actually put it on the back burner for this year because of the COVID situation. But we have decided to actually go ahead with it. So I'd really, really like it if you could book Friday the 11th of September and Saturday morning, the 12th of September, and get together with all your teachers, arrange an afternoon and a Saturday morning that you can watch our conference through webinars online in the safety of your classrooms or your schools, and that we don't miss out on this golden opportunity for this year. But please keep posted on our Facebook page and through our communication with our schools. Anybody is welcome, and there's not going to be a cost involved. So we're really looking forward to that time. And on that note, we won't be having another Thursday afternoon ECD webinar because we're busy gearing up towards our online conference in September. Thank you all for attending this afternoon. And I really hope it was beneficial for you. But could we just please close in prayer? Father God, we're just so grateful for people out there that are so willing to just share their expertise with us, and teachers that have children in common or love of children in common, that are willing to give up of their time just to come and learn more so that we can help our children navigate these unusual times. Lord, just bless every person that is out there working with our children. And we pray for your provision, your protection, your presence in every situation on a daily basis. Thank you. Amen. Right. Bianca, thank you. And once again, thank you to all our attendees. Goodbye, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure.